listen more often to things than to beings. That's not something that we talk that much about. Because those things that maybe rustle in the night, crackling of the fire, to think that those might be embodied of our ancestors seems spooky to us, but why should that be? I'm definitely not someone who likes to be scared, as I said. It's definitely not my thing. And I don't go and see horror movies. That's one thing I cut out right there. And certainly not Halloween, any of that genre. But I remember there is one horror movie that I saw. I saw it after it came out. It was when I was in college. It was in 1982. And I remember seeing it because everybody said, oh, it's such an amazing movie. You've got to go see this movie. It's just incredible. So I thought, okay, I'll go ahead and see it. And some of you might remember this movie. Now, so this came out in 1982. I was in high school, but I remember seeing it in college. I think my friend had it on VHS or something like that. And I went and saw Poltergeist. Now, this is one of the scariest movies I think I've ever seen. Like I said, I don't see that many, but it sure was pretty scary for me. But actually, there was this moment in this movie, because I didn't actually see all of it. I had most of my eyes closed a lot of the time. But there was this one moment in this movie that I really loved, that was really interesting to me. And see if you can remember this moment. Before this family moves into this home, right? And some strange things happen, but they kind of dismiss it or whatever. But then some kind of really strange things happen. One of which is the chairs on their kitchen table sort of pile themselves up into this odd pyramid, right? Now they're kind of like, what in the world is going on here? But the interesting thing is that the mother does not immediately go, oh my gosh, this is something to be terrified about. She's kind of curious. Like, what is this about? And so as a matter of fact, she dresses up her daughter and puts on a little helmet, because they found that if they let go at one point in the kitchen, the child will slide down the hallway as if the child is pulled. And they go, isn't this fun? So the father comes home, they're like, hey, come see this, check this out, this is really cool. And the daughter gets down and she's got the helmet on and she goes zipping off down the hallway and the dad catches her and everything. So they have this sense of play and curiosity about it. And I remember kind of, even back then, I was probably about 20 years old, and thinking, well, that's kind of cool. That rather than reacting automatically in fear, they're actually kind of curious. Like, what is going on here? Because do they have to be scary? You know, in the world of all the religions that are out there, right? I'm willing to bet that there's no religion that gets a universal reaction of fear more than paganism. Now you might think Islam, but really it isn't about the religion that people are afraid of, it's actually about terrorism that they're afraid of. But when it comes to fear about what that religion is, paganism conjures it up. And it's one of the most misunderstood of religions out there. And in fact, to this day, when I go out and I talk in the interfaith world, and whether it's Christians or Muslims or Buddhists, if I mention pagans that they worship at my church, I might get this look, something like this. And it's like kind of this look of horror, like, what? Pagans? You know, and atheists don't even get that reaction. They get more of a look of sort of puzzlement. Like, what's an atheist doing in a church? Either that or it's simply, oh, those poor misguided souls, yes. But pagans, they get the look of like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, really? Now you should know that it isn't everybody that I encounter that does this. Many people are very cool or anything like that, but there is definitely, among many circles, where that is just considered the scariest thing. Now, I don't know about you, but the pagans that I know and hang out with are all very tree-hugging, lovable, slightly offbeat, a little goofy and maybe geeky folks, people very similar to myself. I consider myself sort of paganish. And they're probably the least threatening people that I know. In fact, I think one of the reasons that people are attracted to it as a faith practice is because it lacks violence. It lacks a history of violence. I mean, when was the last time you heard of violence being committed in the name of pagan religion? So where does this fear come from? What is this all about? Well, first of all, One of the things to know about paganism is that it's a huge tent. Like, huge tent. It's a little bit like saying Native American, right? It's a really big phrase out there, and it might give you a little bit of understanding, but it'll give you absolutely no sense of depth as to what's going on there. So just as there are huge differences between, say, the Cherokee or the Chumash or the Salish tribes, their customs, rituals, all sorts of things. So there's vast differences between the various pagan groups that are out there. And in fact, the word pagan actually comes from the Latin paganus, and it was originally not used in any religious sense whatsoever. It was actually a very secular word, and it meant sort of country bumpkin or a yokel. It was to describe someone rather condescendingly who was not very sophisticated. And it wasn't until about the 6th century that it came to have those religious overtones, because in the ancient world, it was in the country where people were still connected to the earth, right, the farmers. That was where the last bastion of paganism still survived, and in some cases still survives today. In the ancient Western world, pagans might be those that worshipped or venerated the Greek or Norse gods, Celtic deities, local spirits like the jinn, or in the Middle East, as in the Middle East, or fairies in Britain. And all over the course of thousands of years, all the different gods and goddesses, spirits and sprites of the ancient world came under this rubric called paganism. But like many religions, paganism has kind of evolved, right? And what they found is that many of them have certain aspects in common. So what do they have in common? Well, first of all, one is the veneration of nature. I wouldn't call it worship, I call it veneration. The idea is that nature is an aspect of the divine, and that the divine speaks to us through nature. Listen more often to things than to beings. For pagans, the world is not fallen, it is holy. The second is it tends to be animistic or shamanic in nature, right? Ancestors are venerated. So along with this nature veneration, there's a belief in spirits that inhabit the natural world, spirits of our ancestors. And they generally like to help us. And there are some that maybe aren't so helpful, but for the most part, they're there to help us. They don't want to harm us. And the third is, of course, that they are polytheistic, right? They believe in multiple or many gods. That's what polytheism means. But sometimes that's even just two, right? And the reason why there's more than one usually is because there's both the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And that divine feminine has co-equal power with the divine masculine. Now, that's in particular here in modern paganism, it tends to emphasize this aspect, reclaiming women's role in religious life, and it has led very much so to the empowerment of women in religious life and outside of religious life. Now, all of this sounds really pretty harmless, right? Oh, it's so lovely. Love nature, love the divine feminine, it's all good. Well, if you go out there and you read websites that are anti-pagan out there, what they'll tell you is that they believe in ritual magic involving blood and sex and sacrifice. It's filled with witches and sorcerers who cast spells to do harm. It's all evil. It's the devil that's running things, really. Gotta cue the scary music backward. I mean, something wicked this way comes indeed. Oh my goodness, that is scary. In fact, I remember one time I went into a conservative Christian store and I was looking at some of the books that they had there. And I remember there was one out on a display, and it was sort of like, I think it was like Christian parenting or something, about how to keep your kids away from evil, and it listed on the cover all sorts of different things, you know, cults and drugs and Satanism and Harry Potter. I'm thinking to myself, really? Harry Potter? Where they celebrate Christmas? Okay, it's fine. So I just, you know, like, where does this fear come from? Where does this all come out? Well, one place is the texts that put down rival religions, right? Those sacred texts. In Deuteronomy 18:9 through 12, it says this: when you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, so right, remember they came out of Egypt into the new land, you must not learn to imitate the abhorrent practices of those nations, No one shall be found among you who makes a son or daughter pass through fire, or who practices divination, or is a soothsayer, or an augur, or a sorcerer, or one who casts spells, or who consults ghosts or spirits, or who seeks oracles from the dead. For whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord. It is because of such abhorrent practices that the Lord your God is driving them out before you. Okay? So this new religion's coming into place where there are already worship practices, and they don't like them. They want you to only be worshiping the way that they do. And of course, there's that famous saying in Exodus 18, right? Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. The King James version of that. Actually, it says, you shall not permit a female sorcerer to live. It's actually the female version of the word sorcerer that's used in the Hebrew there, which always is a little bit amusing to me. It's like, so if you're male and you're a sorcerer, that's okay. And I thought about going off into the whole feminist thing, but I decided no, that's another sermon for another day. And the word that sorcerer is used, it means murmurer of charms. So Exodus 18 is about social and religious laws as well. There's like this boom, boom, boom list of religious laws about what you're supposed to do. So actually before those words, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, there's actually words about rules of restitution should someone seduce a virgin. And that's followed by you'll be killed if you have sex with animals, which really makes you wonder what in the world was going on in the ancient world, right? Now, these are some pretty harsh things to say about a rival religion that you're coming into. And the Jewish faith and subsequently the Christian faith felt that these religions, pagans that is, were then the work of the devil. Because no one should be able to talk to ghosts, and no one should be able to work magic. Magic, that is the realm of God, right? That is the power of God. Which is kind of a little bit amusing to me because isn't that a lot of what Jesus did, right? He did miracles all the time. Notice he doesn't call it magic, it's called miracles. And he saw and he spoke to ancestors such as Moses. He had a vision of Moses. They don't call them ghosts, they call them visions. Muhammad did too. And he venerated nature in that he saw God's handiwork in nature everywhere. Remember the parable of the mustard seed, right? The birds in the sky, birds of heaven, about the birds in the sky, all that. He's constantly quoting and looking at nature for metaphor. For him, God spoke through nature. Now, I don't want to get crazy and say that Jesus was a pagan or anything like that. He was a good Jewish boy, after all. He was monotheistic. But you can see that there's a little bit of hypocrisy going on here. It says that both Christians and the Jewish people needed to separate themselves from the pagans and went so far as to throw sort of the baby out with the bathwater, right? Reducing paganism to those elements that were not understood and fostered fear. And these pagan religions were a threat to the three desert religions. The last competition that stood up against all the desert religions and the one religion that had to be overcome if you were to get converts. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus was the last big competition to Christianity. And make no mistake, most Jews and Christians and Muslims believed that they were truly saving souls, okay? They feared what they did not understand. But I just have to say that there's a certain amount of arrogance that says God only popped up in history for my people in my small geographical region and was unavailable prior to my religion. Paganism is the oldest religion on this planet. And to my mind, has been speaking to us in many different ways. Paganism, it predates the desert religions, and the early monotheistic religions were trying very hard to distance themselves from these polytheistic ones. So you do everything to make yourself what they are not, right? First of all, you reject nature, right? So you reject any kind of connection to nature. So now it's from a fallen universe that is evil and thus reject the physical or even our bodies. And then you reject magic or power that is not given to God, right? You don't have any sense that anybody else could do these things, so you just call it evil. We don't have any way to talk about the dead or the dying. We reject that part of ourselves. It's too scary. We don't want to talk about it. But in the pagan religions, death and dying is a natural part of life. And I think we lost our sense of curiosity. So instead, what they did is they said, let's call this evil. And then what we'll do is we'll take over the competition by taking over their holidays, right? Because people like their holidays, so we'll keep the fun parts. Like Samhain, for example. Let's change it from a time when the Celts believed in the thinning of the veil between the world and that of the dead so that they could talk to their ancestors and say goodbye to loved ones. Instead, let's call it Halloween and All Saints' Day. And we'll dress up in scary costumes and we'll bob for apples, which, by the way, was originally a superstition for young maidens to find their husband. If you can get an apple, you can get a husband. Well, okay. I'll have to try that one. Or there's the pagan winter solstice ceremony, right? Let's make it the birthday of the savior of our religion. Or we'll take a fertility goddess's day of celebration and make it about the rebirth of that savior. But let's keep all the fun stuff like the bunnies and the eggs. So we've lost this. We've lost this connection to nature. We've lost this sense of connection to the cycles that go on every single year. We've lost a way to talk about the dead and to honor the dead. Grief is rejected. Death is something to be afraid of. And we lost our sense of curiosity. Instead, anything that's different now is something to be feared. I think this is why paganism has been on the rise, actually. It's been growing by an average of something like 200 or 300% every year. And why it's popular with Unitarian Universalists. Now, it's still a very, very small part. It's like 0.3% of the population out there. But it's very popular here also with Unitarian Universalists. And we have, a lot of our churches have what are called CUPS groups, right? C-U-U-P-S. It stands for Covenant of UU Pagans. We have one in this church. It's small, but it's growing. If you're part of CUPS, raise your hand. There we go. Now, paganism, to address some of those concerns, it does have rituals, but rituals rich with meaning that connect us back to nature and appreciation for this physical world, and it asks us to take care of this earth. It offers a way to think about mystery that isn't about heaven, hell, God, and judgment, and it honors both the divine feminine and the divine masculine. It embraces diversity of thought, having been persecuted for so long and misunderstood. Most pagans share kind of a kindred soul across all faiths, and they embrace diversity. In fact, our sixth source of wisdom, if you want to know our principles and sources, they're on back of that handout that we give you every Sunday. Our sixth source, it says that we affirm the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. If you didn't know, earth-centered traditions is code for paganism. But wait, you might say, isn't paganism also about devil worship and casting spells? Really? First of all, Satanism is not actually pagan. It isn't polytheistic and doesn't venerate the earth. So let's just take the devil out of worship. And second, spells. Do they have to be scary? I mean, spells are spoken, usually, words that are considered by the user to invoke a magical effect. If you don't believe in that, then what harm is it to you that others do it? I like to think that spells are putting intention out there. They can be good intentions or they can be bad intentions, but spells are not inherently evil. The user of them determines that. And let's face it, paganism is like any religion, be it Christian or Muslim or Buddhist. It's made up of humans. Thus, I've encountered pagan groups that are loving and open, and others that are really closed and judgmental and angry. And I've known covens to be democratic and others to be incredibly hierarchical. I've known shamans to cast spells for their own selfish needs, and I've known others to cast spells of healing for others. And paganism, like any religion, has its good and its bad aspects. But I will say this, the vast majority are very benign, kind, open, and loving people who love this earth. Much like most Unitarian Universalists I know. And you know, paganism is starting to creep into the mainstream, right? You see it here and there. It's when the Christian pastor refers to God as she. It's when the rabbi calls forth the 4 elements in opening prayer. It's the congregant who works to save the earth, not to abuse it. So this Halloween, have fun being scared out there. But I invite you to take the opportunity to look at those things that truly scare you and ask you, is it really something to be scared about? Whether it's, you know, witches in their hats, or ghosts that go bump in the night, or it's a woman wearing a hijab, or terrorists lurking around every corner. Maybe then we can laugh at our fears, not give them so much power over us. That is, if you didn't know, one of the best ways to break an evil spell is to laugh at it. May it be so, blessed be, and amen.